Everyone in the world has dreamed of winning the lottery at least once in their life. The main character, named Thomas, was sure that with such money he would give up on work tomorrow and finally quit. Hodson is a licensed conglomerate that distributes overseas high-end brands in Korea. Thomas became the youngest team lead just 6 years after joining his dream company. The protagonist's team met the sales figures of each expensive brand in the first half of the year. Thomas's boss, named Clinton, said that given the young guy's specialty, there should be no problems. The boss of the main character asked the guy if he coped well with the role of a team lead. Clinton explained himself by saying that in his opinion, the number 5 team is still poorly executed. The man wondered if Assistant Jan was still rebelling. The main character with a soft smile said that now everything began to get better for him. But in fact, it was difficult for the guy to manage a team where everyone was older than him. Thomas, during his work, often drew attention to the fact that his subordinates were constantly talking instead of working. The main character could not keep track of everything because he understood that in his team the Assistant Jan ruled the ball. Thomas was unhappy that the working day had just begun, and his subordinates were already standing and doing nothing. The main character immediately remembered how a few years ago he came to the company and on his first working day promised that he would work hard. The man named Yang didn't pay much attention to the new employee and greeted the guy dryly. Assistant Jan happily exclaimed that working days should be organized more rationally. The main character frowned because he was well aware that the man was already crossing all boundaries. Thomas knew that there was a limit to all patience, so he couldn't stand it anymore and called out to one of his subordinates, named Harry. The main character told the employee that he would be away for a while but would return before lunch, so the rest should not be distracted from work. Thomas instructed one of the employees to pay attention to yesterday's materials, to which Ian said that Mr. Team Leader would soon completely drive his subordinates away. The main character furrowed his brows, but did not answer the assistant, deciding that he would do it another time. After a while, the young man arrived at the place he needed, called a bank. This time, the main character had completely different feelings compared to last time. Thomas approached one of the bank employees, to which the girl asked if the young man had taken the coupon. The main character asked where he should go to get the winnings on a lottery ticket. The bank employee congratulated Thomas and said that the young man needed to go up to the 3rd floor, where he would be told everything. Turning his head, the main character noticed a man who showed exactly where to go. As soon as Thomas left the bank, he quickly ran to the train, on which he was a little late. Standing in the car, the main character was glad that he would be able to get to the office in time for lunch, and that everything went very quickly and without problems. The young man's lottery winnings were approximately 1,800,000 won. The main character was not even upset by the fact that 700 million won was spent on local taxes and duties of the tax authority. The young man began to think about how exactly he should deal with such a huge amount of money. Driving past the Han River, the main character was sure that such a view was definitely not worth 1.8 billion won. The young man decided that the first thing he would do was treat the guys from the team to beef for lunch. Thomas exhaled nervously as soon as he remembered Ian's assistant, who clearly did not like his boss. However, the main character understood that the man was still part of the team, so Thomas needed to put up with it. As soon as the young man returned to the office, he immediately found that there was not a single person from his team at the workplace. One of the other team's employees explained to Thomas that Jan's assistant had taken all the team members to lunch. Looking at his watch, the main character became very dissatisfied because the subordinates left 20 minutes before lunch. A member of the other team snidely said that team lead Thomas needed to take better care of his subordinates. The main character was furious because he did not even know that his subordinates had decided to have lunch. The young man firmly decided for himself that now he would definitely not tolerate such an attitude towards himself and work. As soon as a member of the other team said that things were going badly for Thomas, the main character dialed a phone number. The young man was well aware that he was tired of enduring all this, so he decided to do the right thing. Thomas had a huge amount of money in his account, so, realizing that he had nothing to fear anymore, he began to yell into the phone so that his subordinates immediately returned to the office. Several company executives passing by stopped because the men were curious about what was going on. Several of Thomas's employees stood with their heads bowed while the young man scolded his subordinates. One of the men whispered in Clinton's ear that the head of the unit, Thomas, was still in trouble because of Ian. The assistant came into the office and said with displeasure that the employees of the organization were not even allowed to eat. The director of the company, Hodson, asked Mr. Yang where the man had been carried all this time. The assistant lowered his head guiltily, so the bosses asked the man to work hard. As soon as the management left, Ian skeptically said that he had bought lunch for his colleagues for the first time, and the manager Thomas did not allow his subordinates to eat. Assistant Ian walked up to Harry and said that it wasn't every day that you could get into a crab restaurant without queuing. The main character turned to the impudent employee with the words that he was not a subordinate of Jan's assistant, so the man did not have the right to speak so freely. The man froze abruptly, because he did not expect such a reaction and such words from the head of the department, Thomas. Assistant Jan apologized to the main character with feigned excitement because he did not expect that this would hurt the young man. Then the arrogant employee grinned and wondered if the manager Thomas had decided to show himself in front of the other employees. Suddenly, the protagonist indignantly shouted for Assistant Jan to take his hands out of his pocket and stand up straight. At the same moment, most of the office fell silent because they did not expect Thomas to be able to scream like that. The main character informed his assistant Ian that the impudent subordinate should behave more decently with his superior. Thomas indignantly said that he only tolerates being treated badly by Jan because the man is much older than him. The assistant blushed from head to toe and said that he admitted the fact that he had gone a little too far today. The main character exclaimed that he tolerates the impudent employee only out of pity, because he understands that it is very difficult to work for someone younger than himself. Jan's assistant blushed even more when Thomas began to demand that the man start using his head at least occasionally. The main character indignantly added that Jan needs a head first of all to show himself, and only after that in order not to disgrace the boss at work. Thomas asked the saleswoman if 300 grams of filet would be enough for him for a side dish for one person, to which he received a positive answer. The woman smiled sweetly and told the young man that she would put more green onions for him. As soon as the main character went outside, he immediately went home because he was very hungry. Sitting on the terrace, Thomas congratulated himself on winning the lottery and that this difficult day was over. The main character was delighted with the smell of roast beef on the grill and was already looking forward to eating it. Thomas sadly said that although he had won the lottery, he had no one to share dinner with. As soon as the young man graduated from his studies in Busan, he immediately moved to the capital and started working. For the past 6 years, Thomas has been plowing like a horse, and that's why he hasn't made any friends. Looking back, the main character realized that his colleagues were his only acquaintances in this city. The young man began to wonder why he decided to quarrel with his subordinates today. However, the main character noted that he immediately felt better in his soul as soon as the man spoke out. Thomas recalled how, in a fit of rage, he reminded his assistant Jan that he was the head of the 5th sales team. The main character then grabbed the impudent subordinate by the collar and said in a serious tone that this was the last warning. The young man demanded that Assistant Yang address him properly from now on. The main character emerged from his thoughts and thought that he did not understand at all what came over him then. The young man knew well that he was able to endure a lot, and that was why he did not understand why he had relapsed so much. The main character poured himself an alcoholic drink into a glass and drank it in one gulp to calm down. Then the young man began to cough loudly and think that life is still beautiful. A few minutes later, the main character stood up to the railing and wondered if a huge amount of money had really affected him so much. The young man took a pack of cigarettes from his pocket and thought that now everything would definitely be fine. Thomas was curious about what people plan to do with potential winnings when they buy a lottery ticket. The main character immediately decided that he would get rid of his old 10-year-old car. The young man smiled and quietly said that tomorrow he would go and look for a new car. The main character wondered whether he should invest in an investment so that in 10 years the amount would increase 5-fold. However, the young man immediately changed his mind and decided that the first thing he would do was quit his job, because he was already tired of stress. The main character was firmly convinced that he had nothing to worry about because there was a huge amount of money available. The young man firmly decided for himself that tomorrow he would go to Busan and arrange a long-awaited vacation for himself. The car announced that the train had arrived in Busan, the station of which is the final station on this route, so all passengers need to get off. The main character has not been to Busan for a very long time, because at some point he began to visit his parents much less often. However, the young man is still pleased to visit his father's store, which has existed for 40 years. As soon as the main character entered the store, he immediately greeted his father happily. Monsieur Lutin laid out the goods on the shelves and completely ignored his visitor. Noticing that his father did not pay attention to him, the main character turned to the man again, saying that he had come home. Thomas knew that his father had a slight hearing problem, so he decided to try a different method. Monsieur Lutin turned as soon as he felt a hand resting on his shoulder. As soon as the owner of the store noticed Thomas, he was immediately happy, because he had not seen his son for a very long time. The man took Thomas by the hand and began to question the man, and the main character noted for himself that his father had rough hands, but the character remained as kind as before. Thomas asked his father where his mother was, to which Mr. Luton replied that the woman would be coming soon. Mrs. Camilla entered the store and told her son and husband that she was very afraid that the food might get cold. The main character asked his parents why they buy food themselves instead of ordering delivery. Mrs. Camilla replied that she did not want to throw money down the drain and added that she took a dish from Thomas's favorite restaurant. The main character was feigned joy because he understood that the dishes from that restaurant were not suitable for lunch. Mr. Luton told his son with a smile that the man could not eat so that his parents could get more. After a while, the parents of the main character sat down at the table to celebrate the arrival of their son. Mr. Luton asked the protagonist if Thomas would stay overnight. The man added that his son had not seen his sister since that time, to which Thomas replied that he would leave tonight. Monsieur Lutin said that his son could have stayed if he had not quarreled with his son-in-law. The main character took a deep breath and said that he did not fight with this person. This person just does not do anything and sits on his sister's neck. Noticing that the young man was starting to get angry, Mrs. Camilla began to calm her son. Mr. Luton put the cutlery aside and, bending over the food, said that the son-in-law was not a bad person, but the man's life did not work out. The main character did not say anything, because he understood that good-natured parents could not be persuaded. All his life, Thomas's parents repaired things in a small workshop, but then his son-in-law appeared, who lost his apartment and business due to his own stupidity and sat on the neck of the guy's sister. However, the protagonist's family still did not consider Mason a bad person and constantly justified him. Thomas was well aware that his son-in-law would have a stranglehold on him if he found out about winning the lottery, so he decided not to tell his parents anything. Mr. Luton noted that his son still eats rice with radish and was pleased with it. The main character nodded slightly and replied to his father that such a combination is very tasty. The young man, scratching his head, told his mother that he had received a salary increase for good work. The main character promised that he would send 1,000,000 won to his parents' account every month and asked not to tell his son-in-law anything. Mrs. Camilla furrowed her brows and asked the young man suspiciously if Thomas had won the lottery. The woman then added that if it wasn't a lottery, then Thomas shouldn't say anything stupid. The main character wanted to justify that his salary was really raised, but Mrs. Camilla interrupted her son and ordered him to stop contradicting his mother. The woman asked Thomas to start worrying about himself, because the man's parents would cope with everything themselves. Mr. Luton asked his son not to drink too much, because he knew that Thomas was planning to meet James in the evening. In the evening, the main character thanked the blonde for a wonderful dinner and said that now they would most likely see each other on the wedding day. Jean, who was driving an SUV, told Thomas that she would definitely call when she got home. As soon as the car turned around, the main character immediately noticed that the girl looked very cool behind the wheel of this Jeep. Thomas then looked at James and noted cheerfully that the young man was clearly jealous. James grinned and told his friend that he would buy Thomas a drink because Thomas had treated him to beef from the most delicious restaurant today. The main character asked James if his friend had already found a new home to live with the girl. The red-haired man said that he had already looked for a 2-year-old apartment in a good area. The main character cheerfully asked that the apartment was probably expensive, to which James replied that Jean's parents bought everything. Thomas, despite having almost 2 billion won in his pocket, was still a little jealous of his friend. James said with a big smile that Jean was a lucky lottery ticket for him. The main character asked his friend what the man would do if he really won the lottery. James said that in this case, he would definitely quit his job, get married, and go with his wife to travel around the world. The red-haired man told Thomas that he had recently seen the young man's sister. James said that Thomas's sister now works in a supermarket in one of the districts of the city. The main character froze abruptly in surprise, because he did not expect that his sister worked in a supermarket. James remembered that when Thomas's sister was at university, the girl had been very beautiful, but now everything had changed. The main character did not suspect anything, because Lucy always smiled when they called each other via video call. As soon as James left, Thomas went in search of the supermarket where his sister worked. The main character opened the maps on his phone because he could not find the location of the store. As soon as Thomas found the supermarket he wanted, he only thought that he needed to call his sister first. The young man froze abruptly when he noticed Lucy neatly stacking the boxes. The main character remembered James's words that Thomas's sister used to be very beautiful, but now the girl was unrecognizable. The young man wanted to call out to his sister, but at the last moment he changed his mind, so he turned around and left. The main character realized that Lucy was having a hard time now, but he knew that he couldn't even tell Lucy about her winnings. Thomas froze abruptly when he heard an unpleasantly familiar voice calling out to him. The main character noticed his son-in-law, who cheerfully asked what fate Thomas found himself in their area. Mason walked over to the young man and said happily that he had not seen his brother-in-law for a very long time. The son-in-law of the main character offered the young man to drink a can of beer in honor of the meeting. Thomas noted that Mason has not changed at all and acts as if everything is normal. The son-in-law of the main character asked if Thomas had seen his sister, who now works in a supermarket and says that she likes everything. The young man frowned as Mason casually said that Lucy was working quietly because there was no crowd. The son-in-law of the main character began to parody the man's sister, saying that the girl herself decided to live like this. Thomas became even angrier when Mason chuckled, saying that he didn't understand how the hourly rate was enough for a girl. The son-in-law of the main character said that Lucy was a real sky princess at the university. Mason wondered if Thomas remembered the old days when they were at university. The son-in-law of the young man took a taste of chips and proudly said that thanks to him, a fragile girl would learn what a real working life is. The main character wanted to make another drink of alcohol, but stopped as soon as he heard Mason's words. The young man's son-in-law then said that Lucy's medications cost twice her salary. Mason wondered if Thomas's sister was not too lazy to get there since they lived far away. With his mouth full, the son-in-law of the main character added that the girl walks to work every day and never even asks for a ride. The main character could not continue to listen to Mason, so he abruptly stood up, thereby interrupting his son-in-law in mid-sentence. Mason looked at his brother-in-law in surprise and wondered why the man had jumped up so abruptly. The main character began to boil with anger, so he quietly said that Lucy was doing this because of her husband. Thomas grabbed Mason by the top of his clothes and started yelling that he was cursing the day his sister married such trash. The main character exclaimed that it was because of Mason that his sister suffered so much, and hit his son-in-law in the face with his fist. The young man's son-in-law began to weep bitterly and begged Thomas to be spared by his brother-in-law. The main character emerged from his dreams as soon as Mason asked why Thomas jumped up so abruptly. The young man turned around and told Mason that he was tired, so he was going home. The son-in-law of the main character stopped Thomas and asked his brother-in-law to lend him 300,000 won. Mason, with a big smile on his face, began to promise that he would definitely pay back the entire debt in a couple of days. The main character froze abruptly as soon as the son-in-law clarified that he would return everything when Lucy's salary arrived. Thomas was once again convinced that this pig should never be allowed to get to 1,000,000 won a month. The main character recalled that he had already promised his parents to send 1,000,000 a month. It was for this reason that Thomas could not tell his family about the winnings, because Mason would take matters into his own hands. The main character put 300 million won on the table and asked his son-in-law to tell his parents that their son had left for Seoul. In Thomas's mind, his mother's words sounded about the need for a young man to take care of himself first. The main character desperately wanted to throw off this burden and finally become free. However, the young man was well aware that for this he would still have to go to work. The next day, the main character told the realtor that he was looking for a house that would not exceed 1 billion won and 8 billion won in value. The woman got up from her seat and asked if the young man wanted a cup of coffee. The main character refused and said that he wanted to make an investment that would not put too much pressure on him. The woman was surprised that a young man wants and has the opportunity to invest heavily in real estate. The realtor asked the main character if Thomas had any specific idea. The young man replied that he was thinking about rent, which would be about 300 won a month without a mortgage. The woman said that in Thomas's situation, it is necessary to take into account the monthly rent and market profit. For the main character, it was obvious that if he had a mortgage, the rent would rise. However, the young man still had to take into account the worst-case scenario associated with the loss of housing. The main character told the woman that he wanted to stick to the original budget and asked when he could see the house. The realtor told the young man that he would select good options for him and call back later. The main character put a bottle on the table and with a smile on his face said to himself that it would be very interesting. The next day, Thomas went to work and felt that even the air and sunlight had changed. The young man stopped in front of Hodson's company and reminded himself that he no longer had to worry and make money for a living. As soon as the main character entered the office, He immediately thought that his assistant Jan would most likely be late again. The young team leader was very surprised when he noticed an impudent employee who came before him. Harry quietly asked if Thomas was going to break down again in the morning. Assistant Jan approached the main character and, bowing his head, greeted his superior. The main character looked at the impudent employee, but did not ignore him and also greeted him. Harry and an employee named Mary breathed a sigh of relief, for they were so nervous. The main character hung up his jacket on a hanger and announced to his team that they would now begin their morning meeting. Closer to noon, Assistant Jan could no longer remain silent, so he abruptly stood up from his seat and went to his supervisor. The main character exhaled deeply and emotionlessly asked what exactly the man wanted from him. Assistant Jan said that he had been thinking all weekend about what the young team principal had told him. Mary began to worry because she thought that Jan's assistant was getting into trouble with his temper again. Harry and the young girl looked dumbfounded at their colleague as he expressed his belief that he was putting the boys in an uncomfortable position. The main character looked at his subordinate in surprise when the man said that he wanted to openly discuss everything with Thomas in the evening. The young team leader got up from his seat and suggested that his assistant Jan forget all the grievances and have a drink in the evening. Mary breathed a sigh of relief and thought that Boss Thomas had been looking more peaceful in recent days than before. Looking at the time, the main character invited his subordinates to go for a snack together, saying that he treats everyone at his own expense. The young leader added that he wants to eliminate all disagreements in his team over a portion of juicy beef. Harry, hearing Thomas's words, enthusiastically said that he would find a suitable restaurant right away. After a while, the main character went up to the roof to smoke and thought that after winning the lottery, his problem was solved surprisingly very easily. Thomas had always tolerated Ian's assistant and called the man narrow-minded and narrow-minded. The protagonist smiled because he thought it was surprising that Ian could show courage and honesty. Suddenly, the young man realized that he could have done it all along, but he constantly did not dare. The main character felt with all his body that he was rushing like a ship in full sail. Thomas turned around when he heard a familiar voice asking what the young man was doing on the roof. Clinton noted that Thomas looks extremely pleased and said that he has a case for a young man. The head of the department said that he had heard the news that Thomas had finally settled the problem with his assistant, Ian. The main character noted that Clinton speaks to him in a completely unfriendly tone. Early in the morning, the deputy of the department noticed that the young team leader had solved the problem with Ian. Clinton was sure that the young leader was thinking that he was able to achieve something. The man smirked at the thought that the naive boy really believed that he could succeed with his skills alone. Sitting in the bathhouse, the head of the department, named Robert, asked if Clinton really wanted to give the French prestige brand, which had already failed to sell, to Thomas. The deputy department took a deep breath and explained that he just wanted to teach the young team leader a lesson. Clinton thought for a moment and then said that no experienced team leader would undertake this. The deputy department was convinced that the game was simply not worth the candle, so Thomas would either refuse immediately or fail. Robert took a towel and asked if it was too difficult for a young executive who had only been in office for 4 months. Clinton said with a smile on his face that the man should have been thinking about this when he promoted Thomas. The head of the department said that the young man received his position for excellent abilities and performance. Clinton chuckled and said that this time they would see how outstanding abilities would help the young man. The head of the department told a colleague that the man would have to try hard to convince Thomas to take on the Nacris brand. Clinton said Robert had nothing to worry about because Thomas had been trained for 6 years. The deputy of the department got up from his seat and said that if Thomas failed and messed up, the man would immediately find out. Clinton turned around and, with a snide smile on his face, said that this was the harsh life of a young team leader. The main character exclaimed that he did not understand what exactly Mr. Deputy Department meant. Clinton repeated in a calm tone that Thomas's 5th team will be promoting the prestigious brand. The main character wondered if Nacris didn't leave Korea 2 years ago when they failed in sales. The deputy department explained that things are different now because Korean women did not understand the design of this brand before. Clinton added that Nacris used to be in the top 10 most prestigious brands by sales. However, the young man knew that this rating was not famous for its objectivity, which meant that he could not be trusted. Clinton, with a sly smile on his face, expressed his belief that this was a valuable opportunity for Team 5. The main character said that it would not be easy for his team to cope because Nacris is an unpopular brand. Previously, Thomas would not have done anything, would not have said a word, but now everything has changed, so the young man asked Clinton to reconsider his decision. The protagonist exclaimed that they should focus on existing brands now, but Clinton interrupted Thomas. The deputy of the department looked at the young team leader and said dryly that the man was talking in vain. However, Thomas knew that it was not that he was talking idly, but that he was being instructed to do the impossible. The main character explained that this is a very difficult case, because they clearly do not have enough people, given the past failures of the brand. Clinton sternly pronounced that this was an order from the head of the department, so the young head of the team had no right to appear. The deputy department added that Thomas needed to stop talking and get down to business as soon as possible, rather than criticizing his superiors. Clinton ordered Thomas to hand over the rest of the brands to the first team and focus on Nacris. The deputy of the department expressed his confidence that Robert had given Thomas such a task because he really cared about the guy. Later in the evening, the main character decided to vent his anger and play baseball. In a fit of rage, the young man asked if Clinton really thought that the guy believed the order from the head of the department. As soon as Thomas got tired, the young man came to the conclusion that the head of the department had set it all up on purpose. For 6 years, the main character learned that Clinton entrusts his subordinates with failed cases, and if they suddenly cope, he takes all the glory for himself. Thomas knew that the deputy head of the department was sitting on his throne, skimming the cream. The main character quickly came to terms with this idea and decided for himself that he would see who would outplay whom in this game. Thomas promised that Clinton would see if Thomas was the stone to be discarded or the one to rise from the grave. The main character hit the ball with his bat with all his strength and said that he was looking forward to the result of this deal. In the evening, the young manager met with his subordinate to resolve all misunderstandings. The main character asked Jan's assistant why the man behaved so much with his boss, because they don't have to be on bad terms. The assistant drank a glass of alcoholic beverage and admitted that at first he was just jealous of the boss, Thomas. Jan said that none of his peers had risen to the post of team leader, so the man had to come to terms with the fact that he had no choice. However, a little later, Ian found out that a man much younger than himself had been appointed to the position of the head of the team. Once the man listened to the conversation of his colleagues, who were discussing that most likely Jan was very unpleasant. Employees began to whisper that Ian was specially assigned to the 5th team to test Thomas's abilities as a leader. Ian froze sharply when he realized that he was only a tool to test the young team leader. The man admitted that the more he thought about it, the more angry he got each time. The assistant drank another glass of alcoholic beverage in one gulp and said that he did not understand what he had done wrong. Ian explained that he had decided to do something stupid just to see what Thomas would do, and then he became bolder and more brazen. The man admitted that he was very ashamed of himself because he put the guys from the team in an awkward position. Jan was well aware that he was doing everything that he had always despised, so he wanted to quit as soon as possible. The main character asked the owner of the institution to bring them more alcohol. Thomas asked his subordinate if the man was able to achieve all the goals he dreamed of when he joined the team. The main character was firmly convinced that Ian must have a big goal when the man came to the team. The young man said that if that was the case, then the subordinate should not even think about leaving. The main character admitted that he himself recently thought about the assistant and his departure from the workplace. The young man explained to the assistant that this was due to other personal problems. Thomas said that in the long run, all these people will have less than 1% impact on a man's life. The main character asked his subordinate to continue on his way if the man still had an unachieved goal. Assistant Yang looked at his supervisor in surprise because he hadn't expected the young man to say such words to him. Thomas asked Ian to channel his jealousy, shame, and guilt for his behavior into energy for active work in team number 5. The next morning, as soon as the main character came to the office, he immediately noticed that his subordinates were already working at full speed. The young man immediately turned his attention to Ian's assistant, who was explaining to Harry how to do it correctly. The protagonist politely asked Mary to check the available meeting rooms for today. The young woman explained that she had already called the support service and booked a hall for 3 o'clock today. Noticing the surprise on the leader's face, Mary explained that it was Ian's assistant who had asked him to do it in the morning. The protagonist asked Harry to prepare a table of Alessandro Marine's profitability and sales data for the first half of the year. Assistant Jan handed Thomas a folder that contained up-to-date information about the uniforms of their brand's stores in Korean stores. As soon as the subordinate said that the manager would need this data, Thomas asked with a smile if the man remembered what he was promised yesterday. The main character announced that they would go to the meeting with Nacris with the whole team together to negotiate. The assistant looked at the man in surprise, and then confidently said that they would definitely cope with everything. As soon as the protagonist was informed that the NACRIS representatives would be there in 15 minutes, Thomas informed his subordinates that they needed to go. Other teams in the department already knew that the young leader was going to his first negotiations. The main character recalled a moment that happened 5 years ago in Paris, when Clinton was still the head of the team, and Thomas himself had just got a job. The young man accompanied Clinton to business meetings with leading European brands. The main character handed his supervisor sheets of paper on which a brief overview of the upcoming trip schedule was depicted. Clinton was quick to point out that this trip was busy compared to previous ones. The team principal asked Thomas if the young man had agreed on the next meeting in Milan. The main character, with a wide smile on his face, said that they fit into the schedule clearly. While at the airport, Clinton asked his interlocutor on the phone how everything went for him. The main character approached his supervisor and said that they were very lucky because he managed to book the 2 remaining seats before Milan. The young man added that the boarding had already been announced, so they needed to hurry up to make it. Clinton told his subordinate that Thomas would cancel all meetings for the next day because they were returning to Paris. Thomas began to explain to his boss that they already had a hotel booked in Milan, which was the next destination. Clinton exclaimed in displeasure that no one had said that the count should be convenient only for Thomas. The main character fell into a stupor as soon as the boss began to yell that he did not understand why his subordinate was meddling in the wrong business. Thomas was often angry because of Clinton's unpredictable behavior, but he was surprised that Clinton was able to mimic the situation no worse than a chameleon. The man's negotiations were always excellent because Clinton always had his own method. The main character realized that it was time to put into practice everything that the young man had learned from his manager during all this time. Assistant Jan asked Mary if the young woman had made a temporary pass, to which he immediately received a positive answer. Mary said she would issue a pass to NACRIS representatives as soon as they were there. As soon as the brand representatives entered the building, the main character immediately approached them and began to shake hands, expressing gratitude to the men for coming to them. This was the first rule of Clinton's negotiations, according to which, regardless of the size of the brand, it is necessary to always warmly welcome everyone who came to the team. As soon as everyone was gathered in the meeting room, Mary placed a glass of water on the table and announced that she would be pressing outside. The main character told his subordinate that the young woman could return to the office because the meeting would take a long time to prolong. Before leaving, Mary took one more look at her supervisor and mentally wished her boss good luck in the negotiations. Thomas said that he was pleased to see his compatriot in a senior position in the Asian branch of NACRIS. A man named Steve said that he studied at a design school in Madrid, where he was lucky enough to start working at Zara. Steve revealed that he was able to work with different positions in that place, and now he had the opportunity to work at NACRIS. The man with a big smile on his face said that he had known the company Hodson since the days of Philiplane. The second rule was that even before coming to the meeting, you need to carefully study what is known about the other party. The main character knew that the most important thing is how honestly you tell your story. Steve introduced his companion by the name Blake and added that the man was their Japanese representative. The main character offered to negotiate in English, which was comfortable for each participant. According to the third rule at the negotiating table, you should not answer questions, but ask them, so Thomas asked the men if NACRIS was doing well in Japan. Having received a positive answer, the main character asked whether this meant that the head office allocated considerable sums for advertising expenses. Assistant Jan said that this is a basic practice, because there are a lot of NACRIS advertisements in Japanese magazines. Steve smiled mischievously and informed the men that in their case, this was absolutely not the case. Assistant Jan asked how exactly NACRIS promotes itself and ensures store recognition without advertising costs. The main character stopped his subordinate, saying that they would still have time to discuss expenses and income. In reality, however, Thomas thought that Jan's assistant had done a great job because the atmosphere was now to their advantage. Blake said that they deduct 3% of the total amount of orders as an advertising fee. The Japanese representative said that in his country, companies do this, instead of concluding consignments. The main character asked the men what the profit would be if we considered the license. Steve said that in this case, they take 70% from leather goods and 75% from clothes. The young head of the fifth team immediately noted that Japan had much more profit than theirs. The protagonist revealed that NACRIS representatives offered them 60 and 65%, which is much less. It was obvious that these conditions were not favorable for Hodson, so something had to be done about it. Steve explained that they are cautious about re-entering the market because they believe they need to pay more attention to Japan. The man added that it is difficult for them not to have some concerns, given the past failure with the Hodson Company. Steve said that there are too many factors to consider in the Korean market for high-end brands. The main character said that now everything is a little different, because Korea has changed a long time ago. The young man remembered Clinton's words that everything is different now, because then Korean women did not understand the design of nacris. The main character voiced this idea and added that for nacris, this is not a risky adventure, but a valuable opportunity. The deputy of the department sat at his workplace and, sipping tea, thought about the fact that the fifth team had been negotiating for a very long time. Clinton was sure that negotiations with nacris should have ended a long time ago, so the man did not understand why the team was dragging its feet for so long. Mary asked Harry how long the negotiations had been going on, to which the man replied that it had been at least 2 hours. The young woman glanced at the wall clock and asked herself when their colleagues would be finished. The main character told his interlocutors that for the nacris brand, entering the Korean market could be a great opportunity. The young man explained that the consumer market in Korea has great potential in recent years. Thomas said that they should think better about the distribution of profits so that neither Hodson nor nacris would fail a second time. The main character looked at Steve, making it clear with all his appearance that this issue needs to be carefully worked out. The man adjusted his glasses and calmly said that their main focus this time was Japan. Steve said that Principal Robert was the first to make the proposal, so they are in this place now. The main character thought that this was great, but did not understand what to do next. Steve, with a snide smile on his face, asked if Mr. Deputy Officer would join him. The main character tried to save face so that the man would not suspect anything, and asked why Mr. Steve was asking about Clinton. Steve explained that the deputy department had been with Principal Robert last time and had handled the profit issue perfectly. Suddenly, the protagonist realized that Steve had connections with Director Robert. However, the young man did not understand at all when Steve managed to sing with Clinton. The man with glasses admitted that he actually thought that he would just meet with Mr. Clinton today and sign a contract. Assistant Jan suddenly realized that the bosses had already decided everything, and their team was simply being mocked. It dawned on the protagonist that this whole meeting is a mere formality and does not entail anything. It turned out that the deputy department again brazenly deceived the main character. The young man did not understand at all why Clinton needed to send him to this place and wish him good luck. Ian's assistant immediately noticed that Mr. Leader of the fifth team was shocked by the mention of Clinton. The man whispered a request in the main character's ear that Thomas controlled himself and did not show his weakness. The words of the subordinate had an effect on Thomas, so the main character began to think that he could not allow circumstances to get the better of him. The young man decided to dismiss the fact that Director Robert and Deputy Director Clinton had contacted nacris first. Thomas understood that even if the profits did not suit his superiors, he had no choice but to take moderately positive measures. The main character knew perfectly well that for them, this contract would never be profitable with such conditions. Thomas suddenly realized that everyone was counting on his team to fail nacris again. It is for this reason that Clinton and Robert, who are supposed to be present at the talks, do not even think of going to the meeting, although they know perfectly well where and when it is being held. As soon as the main character added 2 plus 2, he immediately realized that this was a trap set especially for him. However, Thomas was convinced that all was not lost at this negotiating table. According to the last rule of the deputy head of the department, it was necessary to attack if they began to drive you into a dead end. The main character called out to Jan's assistant and asked the man to give him the prepared data. Thomas explained that he was holding a report on the results of work for the past year of branded stores and shopping centers. Steve looked at the young man in surprise when he said that no company controlled these areas better than they did. The deputy head of the department went to the window and quietly said that the fifth team was very late. Robert said in a calm tone that with such a profit, the young man would not last even a year. The head of the department added that it doesn't matter to them at all whether the deal burns out or not, because Thomas will have to fight alone for the entire fifth team. Clinton grinned snidely and said that sometimes it is very useful to experience such a risk firsthand. A couple of minutes later, Thomas came into the office and the deputy head of the department slyly said that the man looked very pleased. The main character approached the head of the department, and Clinton asked how the young man's first negotiations went. Then the deputy head of the department expressed his confidence that Thomas did an excellent job. The main character furrowed his brows, because he realized that his superiors really do not count on anything. Clinton ordered the young man to behave appropriately in front of the director, and not to slap the man with an angry look. The deputy head of the department said that since this was Thomas's first negotiation, it was obvious that the young man was not expected to be 100% effective. Clinton looked at the protagonist and concluded that Thomas's team would have to work hard for a long time. Director Robert promised that he would take into account the fact that this was Thomas's first negotiation when making his decision, and asked the young man to tell him about the results. The young man smiled because he knew how much his superiors were waiting for the results of the negotiations. The main character, while in negotiations, told the representatives of Nacris that no company controls branded stores and shopping centers better than them. Blake and Steve looked at the young man in surprise and did not object. Thomas said that usually when opening a brand, they focus on shopping centers and online stores, but in Korea, great importance is paid to special stores with discounts. The main character handed the Nacris representatives a folder with documents and asked the men to personally make sure of everything. Steve picked up the folder and thought that he hadn't expected this team to be so well prepared. The main character began to carefully watch how the man in glasses examines the documents. The head of the fifth team promised Nacris representatives that they would take responsibility for special stores with discounts. The protagonist then expressed his belief that the men were unlikely to have discussed this with Mr. Clinton. The young man said that he was saying this on his own behalf, as a responsible person. As soon as the protagonist smiles, the deputy head of the department irritably asks why Thomas is grinning. The young man looked at the head of the department and said that the terms of the contract would be as the man expected. Thomas said that the profit will be 65% from leather and 70% from clothing, including incentives for store employees. The main character added that the company did not request advertising costs because the risk is minimal. The head of the department, together with his deputy, abruptly got up from their seats because they were dumbfounded. Robert ran up to Thomas and happily asked how the young man managed to achieve such success. Clinton angrily said that he had told the director earlier that the young man could handle anything. The main character looked into the eyes of the deputy department and slyly thanked the man for his support. The head of the department, Robert, glanced at his wristwatch and noticed that it was 6:30. Enthusiastically, the man offered to hold a meeting before the working day was over. Robert ordered all the team leaders to gather in the conference room and Thomas to give a talk about Nacris. The main character decided to collect his thoughts because the meeting was supposed to start in 30 minutes. The young man firmly decided that he needed to speak boldly because all the team leaders would be present at the meeting. Turning his head, the main character noticed a girl named Emily who immediately greeted him. Thomas said with a smile on his face that they had not seen each other for a long time and asked the girl how she was doing. Emily was a central figure in the first sales team and did an excellent job. The young girl said that everything was still with her and asked if Thomas was preparing for the meeting, to which she received a positive answer. Emily entered the elevator with the main character and asked if the man was working at Nacris now. The main character replied with a smile on his face that he was surprised by the fact that the rumors spread so quickly. As she got out of the elevator, Emily said that she was a little jealous of Thomas and that she wanted to enjoy her work too. The main character expressed confidence that someday a holiday will come to Emily's street. The elevator door closed, and the young girl remained standing, digesting Thomas's words. The main character really hoped that now they would be able to see Emily more often. Thomas proudly told his assistant that the first contract was an incredible success thanks to the man. Ian said that now the deal should be handed over to the first command because the deputy head of the department ordered it. The main character wondered if their number of people in the team would not be enough to bring the deal with Nacris to mind. Assistant Ian was very surprised when the team principal said that he wanted to try to deal with the deal on his own. The protagonist's subordinate reminded the young man that they don't have as many people as the first team. The young man was well aware that Mary and Harry still had a lot to learn. The main character looked at his assistant and explained that he wanted to use this problem as an opportunity. Assistant Ian opened his mouth in surprise when Thomas announced that he planned to request reinforcements for the fifth team. The main character explained to his subordinate that they needed a person who would completely change the idea of their team. Assistant Jan was very interested in who Thomas was talking about, so he was very surprised when the supervisor named Emily. The protagonist's subordinate hesitantly asked what it was possible to ask the first team for their strongest employee. The young man looked at Ian's assistant and confidently said that he would make it possible. The protagonist's subordinate thought for a while, and then, taking a deep breath, said that Emily would definitely be able to transform their team. Assistant Jan said that it was very motivating and admitted that he was a little worried. A subordinate of the main character asked whether the deputy head of the department would give the go-ahead. In this case, it was assumed that the fifth team would take over the Nacris brand, which has a high probability of failure. Assistant Jan informed the main character that in this case, all their projects would go to the first team. Thomas agreed with the words of his subordinate, because if the deal with Nacris did not burn out, then their team would fall under the reduction. Then in a serious tone, the main character added that the fifth team has always been very diverse. From the very beginning, when the hunting season ends, even the most loyal hound is disposed of by the owner. Assistant Jan grinned nervously and informed the main character that he urgently wanted to go to the toilet. The young man suggested that his subordinate go together, because Thomas was also starting to get nervous. Standing in front of the meeting room, the main character felt completely different from the feelings before a regular meeting for team leaders. As soon as Thomas stepped inside the office, he knew that the other team principals had already heard the news about Nacris. The main character clearly had the feeling that other employees were looking at him and silently asking what was wrong with the young man. The head of the department exclaimed with admiration when he noticed Thomas and said that he was glad to see the hero of the day. Robert informed everyone present that Thomas had signed his first contract, which was great for them. As soon as the leaders of the other teams began to clap their hands, the main character bowed his head, expressing his gratitude. The head of the department said that their youngest team leader is showing excellent performance, which means that the rest should follow the example of the man. Robert focused on the head of the first team named David, asking how much he could expect from the man. David lowered his head and promised the head of the department that he would work even harder. Robert exclaimed indignantly that he was tired of promises because he needed results from sales. The head of the department said sternly that the first team should be ashamed because Thomas had passed them. The main character was unpleasant that the head of the first team was being scolded because of him. When Thomas was a junior employee, assistants seemed as unattainable to a man as the peaks of mountains. When the main character became an assistant, the team leaders seemed to be celestials. But now Thomas understood that this was not the case at all. The young man realized that everyone below the board of directors was just an employee. Robert revealed that he told the head of the fifth team to transfer some of his brands to the #1 team. The deputy head of the department was startled when Robert said that Thomas had decided to handle it himself. Clinton asked the head of the department how Thomas's team would prepare for Nacris if they had to control all the other brands. Robert assumed that the young man had his own plan, so he asked Thomas to share it with everyone. The main character in a calm tone expressed his confidence that there will be no second failure of Nacris in the Hodson Company. The young man looked at the head of the department and said that they needed another person to join the team. Clinton exclaimed that they had already cut people to form 5 teams, and Thomas suggested a reshuffle. The deputy head of the department furrowed his brows and said in a stern tone that this was too much, so the man needed to stick to the plan and not create problems. If everything were as before, the main character would have avoided looking at Clinton directly and would have kept his objections to himself. However, now the young man was not afraid because he had a huge amount of money in his pocket. The division chief held out his hand to signal that Clinton should stop showing his objection. Robert asked his deputy why he should ruin Thomas's fighting spirit if the team leader showed his confidence. The head of the department was sure Thomas had brought it up because he was sure he could lead everyone. Robert looked into the eyes of the main character and expressed his belief that Thomas personally wants to take all the responsibility for himself. The main character said in a calm tone that he wanted to take the center figure of the first team named Emily. David, leaving the meeting room, was upset because he had to send his best employee to the fifth team. A man in glasses approached Emily and said that he had something to tell the young girl. Emily immediately noticed that her boss had a very gloomy expression on his face, which did not bode well. As soon as it got dark, the main character went to the office of the deputy head of the department. Clinton expressed his confidence that the young man was clearly pleased with his behavior today at the meeting. The main character looked at the deputy of the department with a calm look and said nothing. Clinton, with a sly smile on his face, asked if Thomas thought he had gained too much confidence. In a calm tone, the main character said that he was acting exactly as Clinton himself told him. Thomas clarified that the deputy head of the department asked for a contract with Nacris, so the young man achieved it. The main character exclaimed that he also chose brands to transfer to the first team, but for this he needs a good center for the team. As soon as Thomas said that only with such efforts they could achieve something, Clinton asked what had come over the man today. The main character looked the deputy head of the department directly in the eyes and explained that it was for this reason that he asked Robert directly. The young man assured Clinton that in this case he would definitely be able to cope with Nacris. Suddenly, the main character felt a sharp pain in his leg when the deputy head of the department kicked the man. Clinton indignantly exclaimed that Thomas had already forgotten who exactly the young man should be afraid of. The main character was not surprised, because Clinton was always ready to show his worst sides, if necessary. The deputy head of the department was especially ruthless and cruel towards his subordinates, who put him at a disadvantage. The main character calmly said that he would like to show the same zeal for work as the deputy head of the department. Thomas asked if Clinton remembered what he said when the man was his assistant. The main character said that you need to go to work as if it were a battle, discarding all romance. However, Clinton then abandoned everything by the end of the week and, taking the main character with him, flew to Paris. Despite the fact that Clinton was then the youngest team leader, the man fought for each brand with all his might. Thomas said that he saw perfectly well the perseverance, passion, and how Clinton's eyes shone. So the man wanted to be like his leader. The main character calmly said that the deputy head of the department no longer has the same light as before. The young man looked into Clinton's eyes and resolutely asked to be allowed to prove himself in his work with the 5th team. There was silence in the room as soon as Thomas promised that he would always be grateful to the deputy head of the department. Clinton then began laughing out loud and saying that Thomas had won this time. The deputy head of the department calmed down and in a stern tone ordered the young man to get up immediately. As he left the office, Clinton said that it was not enough for the young man to break his leg. The deputy head of the department, as soon as he went out into the corridor, noticed Jan's assistant. Clinton approached the man and disgruntled asked if the employee was afraid that Thomas would be eaten. Without waiting for an answer, Clinton turned around and said that Assistant Yang was a strange character because he had been impudent with his boss. The deputy head of the department chuckled because he realized that Thomas had been able to find normal employees. As soon as Assistant Jan entered the office, he immediately noticed the main character, who had just risen from the floor. The employee said that the young man had a normal conversation with Clinton, but the main character himself had a mixed opinion on this matter. The team leader looked at his subordinate and said that Clinton was a very unpredictable person. Returning home by subway, the main character clearly felt an aching pain in his leg. As soon as Thomas looked at his bank account and saw the huge amount, he felt his fatigue disappear with his hand. The main character became very interested to find out how rich he is compared to ordinary people in the car. The young man was very surprised when he noticed that Emily had texted him and asked if Thomas had a minute. As soon as the main character picked up the phone, Emily immediately apologizing for the sudden call. Thomas said that the girl was most likely surprised by the fact that she was being transferred to the 5th team the following week. In a serious tone, Emily wondered if this was a request from a young guy. The main character honestly admitted to Emily that he demanded a young girl to be transferred to his team. Emily wondered if Thomas did this because of a promise made by the man 3 years ago. These words of the girl made the main character think a little before his answer. The next morning, as soon as Thomas entered the office, he immediately greeted his assistant Ian. A subordinate of the protagonist said that they need to do a lot to prepare a contract with Nacris. The young leader of the 5th team asked his subordinate if he could already hear anything to do. Noticing the confused expression on the face of Ian's assistant, the main character asked what had happened. The subordinate of the young leader of the 5th group pointed his finger at the young girl Emily in confusion. The main character asked the employee that the girl was not supposed to be transferred next week. Emily said that she couldn't wait to become a center in the 5th team, so she came herself. The main character smiled when the young girl thanked him for the invitation to work together in a team. Emily turned to Mary and said that she had a small request for the young girl. The future employee of the 5th team asked if Mary was now a center in her team, to which she received a positive answer. Mary was taken aback when Emily asked her to organize all brands by Monday so that she could see the margin base, customer price, and work guide for each brand. Assistant Ian and Harry were also taken aback because Emily's request was not at all simple. Mary said in confusion that she would have no problem compiling a margin base, prices, and ordering customers. Emily told the young girl that it was better for the center to write down everything important and not to keep everything in his head. Then the future employee of the 5th team wished Thomas and the rest of the colleagues a good working day and left. Mary ran after Emily to ask the girl again what exactly she needed to do before Monday. Harry said enthusiastically that Emily was indeed the best center in the entire Hodson company. Assistant Jan, in turn, added that the rumors about Emily are definitely not lying. Going outside, Thomas's subordinate confessed to the protagonist that he did not expect Emily to be so impeccable in her work. Ian's assistant clearly had the feeling that they were definitely running under the strict guidance of Emily. The main character replied in a calm tone that over time, The fifth team will definitely get used to everything. Emily approached the supervisor Thomas and assistant Jan and asked if the men had a good lunch. The protagonist's subordinate frowned when he noticed a young girl who would become his colleague. The future employee of the fifth team said that she had one more small request. Emily asked where her future workplace would be, so Harry immediately showed the girl the table. The young girl thought for a while and then said that her place was very well organized. Emily suggested moving the printer to another location, to which Harry replied that it would be extremely difficult for the entire team. The main character intervened in the dialogue, asking his subordinate to fulfill the request of Mrs. Emily. The young girl with a smile on her face admitted that she was very pleased that Thomas appreciates the real center of his team. The protagonist informed the employees that Emily had moved to their peripheral team from a thriving first team, so they needed to show gratitude. Assistant Ian arched an eyebrow and mentally wondered why they were a peripheral team. During the break, a subordinate asked Thomas if the manager thought adding Emily to his team was a good idea. The assistant manager said that Emily was not at all suitable for the fifth team because everything went wrong from the very beginning. The main character explained that the man has such an impression because he has not yet had time to recognize the girl. The young man added that in fact, Emily has a very soft and sensitive character. Initially, the girl was in a different team, where there were mainly women who were jealous of Emily's appearance and abilities. One evening, the young girl decided to drink, so she chose the bar closest to work. The main character returned home on foot, because the metro was already closed, and a taxi could not be called either. The young man was slightly drunk and thought that Clinton would one day definitely lead him to the grave. The main character lit a cigarette and thought about whether he should try to call a taxi again. Suddenly, the young man noticed Emily, who was lying on the table of one of the bars and was clearly not sober. The young girl raised her head when she noticed that someone had approached her and recognized Thomas's face as he approached. The main character wondered if the employee of the company drank in such a place alone. Emily frowned and asked Thomas in a sluggish tone where the young man had come from in this place in the first place. The main character, with a big smile on his face, explained that Mr. Clinton had detained him. The young girl replied that she now understands why Thomas has such an appearance. Jan's assistant was impressed after his boss's story because he couldn't believe that Emily was capable of such a thing. The main character admitted that he actually considers the center of the first team to be a very principled and strong-willed woman. Assistant Ian concluded that Emily had a hard time before because it is difficult to build relationships with colleagues. Thomas said that when a gentle person restrains his anger for a long time, he breaks down especially cruelly. The main character told a subordinate that at that time Emily was going to leave the team because she had a big quarrel with the management. The young man remembered how that evening a few years ago he brought Emily a drink for a hangover. The main character asked the young girl if Emily was having a hard time at work now. The girl admitted that she began to have the feeling that she had no place in the company of Hodson. Emily quietly admitted that she hadn't thought she needed anyone in the company lately. The main character looked at the young girl with a thoughtful look, because he thought Emily was very capable. Thomas believed that it was a shame to quit without even having time to fully reveal his skills in work. The main character told his assistant Jan that it was for this reason that he wanted Emily to prove herself as a center in sales. Thomas's subordinate realized that the man did not want to say that the girl owed all her achievements to him. The main character said in a calm tone that this was not what he wanted to convey to his subordinate. Thomas explained that he just saw the potential in Emily and thought that the girl would find a use for her abilities in sales. Assistant Yang bowed and asked the supervisor to find a use for his potential as well. Then the subordinate of the main character said goodbye to his superior, saying that they would see each other tomorrow. Thomas remembered telling Emily a few years ago that the sales department was the perfect place for someone as adamant as her. The young girl turned her attention to the main character as soon as the man said that it was important for the center to defend her opinion. Thomas said that he would be happy to work with such a first-class center as soon as he became the head of the team. The young girl smiled and said that she would look forward to this moment in time. The next day, as soon as the main character got off the bus, the man realized that he had come to the office too early. On the way, the young team leader met an assistant Jan, who also decided to come to work early. Thomas's subordinate told the manager that he was now trying to be more polite to Emily, after which she told the manager. Mary ran up to the men and, wishing them good morning, asked if the man was going to work. The main character replied that he met his subordinate by chance and noted that Mary also came early today. Noticing sandwiches in the bag of his subordinate, the young man asked if Mary had taken them for breakfast. The girl explained that she needed to prepare something for Emily, so as soon as she woke up, she immediately got to work. Mary said goodbye to her colleague and manager, saying that she needed to have time to deal with all the cases. Assistant Jan was surprised by such diligence on the part of the young girl and the fact that Mary was having breakfast at work. The protagonist pondered when a subordinate asked if Thomas had told Mary about everything. The young man went to his subordinate to inform the girl that they needed to talk. The main character told Mary that he believes that the girl needs to work this week and quit. With a stony face, the young team leader announced that Mary was no longer needed. The young girl exclaimed in fright that she would definitely try her best to change Mr. Thomas's mind. The main character said that Mary cannot be compared with the first-class center Emily, so the girl needs to leave. Tears welled up in the eyes of Thomas's subordinate when the girl said that she did not have time to complete her task. The young team leader said that he was asking Mary to leave not because the girl was doing poorly, but because the company did not want to waste time on training an employee. The main character promised that he would entrust his subordinate with tasks that Mary could better cope with. The young girl humbly lowered her head and said that she understood the words of her leader. After this conversation, the main character noted that Mary never got up from her seat. As soon as it was time for lunch, Jan's assistant got up from his desk and suggested that they go out to eat. A subordinate of the main character asked if his colleague wanted to try something new. Assistant Ian asked Mary what her young colleague planned to eat. Noticing that the young girl did not react in any way, the man approached Mary and repeated his question. Assistant Ian looked at the girl's monitor and asked why Mary needed last year's credit records. The young girl explained that she needed to put everything in order, so colleagues could go to lunch without her. Assistant Jan exclaimed that you can't work on an empty stomach, so the girl had to eat. Noticing that Mary was adamant in her decision, Jan's assistant was a little confused, but did not insist anymore. An employee of the 5th team decided to go without Mary, but asked the young girl to eat. Returning from lunch, Assistant Ian, together with Harry, thanked the main character for the delicious dishes. The young leader of the 5th team approached Mary and asked if the girl had lunch. The young girl exhaled deeply and replied to her supervisor that she had had a little snack. From the cup of coffee, the main character realized that Mary drank only it, which meant that the young girl would not last long. The young team leader was convinced that everyone had their own areas to work on. The main character considered it important to be able to survive the anxiety and anxieties of the day in order to create his own system in this world. After a while, Mary looked at the cell phone screen in surprise when she noticed that her father had called her. The young girl told the team leader that she would step away for a minute because she was getting a call. Standing in the hallway, Mary apologized to her beloved dad for not being able to come this weekend. The young girl explained that she had a lot to do at work, so she would need to prepare all weekend. In a guilty voice, Emily apologized to her father for not being able to come to his birthday party. The man said that he really wanted to see his daughter, to which Emily replied that she was very busy now. The young girl told her father that they were now working on a new project, and then promised that she would call back later and dropped the call. The next morning, the main character received a call from a realtor from a real estate agency to provide information. The woman told the protagonist that they had a great offer for Thomas and asked when the man could take the time. The main character said that they could meet on the weekend, but in fact he had already forgotten about buying an apartment because he had a lot of things to do at work. While in the subway car, Thomas thought about visiting this agency more often because we are talking about a lot of money. The main character knew that money becomes valuable when it is in circulation, and when it is in vain in the wallet, it is just paper. Thomas remembered that from today, Emily will officially become a member of his team. As soon as the main character entered the office, he immediately noticed a new employee with a folder in her hand, who asked Mary how long it took the girl to do all this. The head of the 5th team was interested to find out what happened to his subordinates early in the morning, so he asked what was happening. Harry turned his head and greeted his supervisor in confusion, wishing him good morning. Emily informed Mary that this was not exactly what she needed to get from a young girl. Mary lowered her head guiltily in front of the new employee of the 1st team because she was ashamed. Emily asked the girl to tell her that she hadn't been poring over the report all her weekend. The main character approached his subordinates and took a report in his hands to understand what kind of situation had happened. The young head of the 5th team was very surprised because now the man understood the situation. Thomas noted that Mary had made a perfect report that could be submitted to the head of the department right now for review. Emily, scratching her head, said that she was not asking for a report from the young girl, but an ordinary document. Mary was asked by a new colleague to tell her all the mistakes and inaccuracies in order to correct everything. Emily exclaimed that this was not what she wanted to say to the young girl right now. The new employee of the fifth team shook Mary's hand and admitted that she could not have made such a perfect report. Mary began to have tears in her eyes, until the young girl realized that Emily was now praising her. The young leader of the fifth team asked his subordinate if Mary still had the original data. The protagonist, with a smile on his face, explained that they would save the data and use it as a guide in the future. Mary could not believe that the head of the fifth team said these words absolutely sincerely. The protagonist smiled broadly and praised Mary for the young girl's excellent work. Mary could no longer hold back her tears, so she cried in front of all her colleagues. The main character was very confused and asked the young girl why she was crying. Mary covered her face with her hands and began to beg for forgiveness, saying that she was sorry. Assistant Ian, Harry, and Emily were also confused because they did not know how to calm down their colleague. A young girl told the main character that she needed to go wash and went to the toilet. Mary washed her face and, looking at her reflection in the mirror, thought that she was very embarrassed. After a while, the young girl climbed to the roof of the company building because she was called by the head of the team. Mary admitted that she never knew about the existence of this place, to which the main character replied that the girl simply did not smoke, so she did not need to be on the roof. Thomas said that Mary surprised him today because the man did not expect to see tears from such a bright and brave girl. The main character asked if the girl thought that the life of a contract worker was not so simple. Mary looked at her supervisor in surprise when the man said that only 4 months had passed. The main character said that even if Mary is not transferred to the TAT, the girl will be calm if she has a guarantee in the form of a 1-year contract. However, there was no guarantee, so the young girl struggled to prove her worth in such a short time. Mary agreed with the words of the leader, and the main character said that the girl just needs to continue working hard. The main character, with a sly smile on his face, said that he would completely take care of the rest of the problems. Thomas then looked into Mary's eyes and informed her that with the girl's abilities, this was impossible. Noticing the confused expression on Mary's face, the main character looked into the distance and said that he knew his business. The young leader of the first team spread his arms to the sides and asked the girl from now on to do as he said. Mary smiled in confusion when the protagonist asked the young girl to trust only him. The young leader of the first team exclaimed that Mary needed to work hard while her contract was valid to make it work. Then Thomas took out a pack of cigarettes and said that it was all just a pathetic attempt to pass off wishful thinking. The main character said that he would go a little to smoke so that the smoke did not get on the young girl. Thomas told Mary that he had come to Seoul from Busan when he was still inexperienced and was able to stay afloat only because of desperation. The main character was sure that the young girl understood him because she had been in the company for 4 months. Movies always show a new employee giving a groundbreaking presentation, and the CEO and the entire board of directors are so impressed that they give him a standing ovation. After his ingenuity, the main character saves the team from collapse, and everything becomes fine. The young leader of the fifth team asked Mary if the girl had seen the CEO come to the presentation shows. Thomas added that when you are a beginner, you are always busy or too worried about why you are given so little work. The main character took a puff and said that a contract employee could not cope with all this in the period allotted to him. The young leader of the fifth team explained to Mary that this was the reason he invited Emily to visit them, because the team needs results, and leaders need power to protect their people. The main character was well aware that Mary worked day and night 7 days a week and eventually pushed herself to the limit. Thomas said that the girl was so desperate that she did not notice how the center pulled her partners to herself. The young head of the fifth team asked Mary to find out how Emily sees her position as a center. The main character said with a smile that Emily never perceived Mary as a temporary employee. Tears came to the young girl's eyes when the man said that he had to protect Mary, as the girl was part of his team. The main character exclaimed that they will definitely defeat Nacris, because it simply cannot be otherwise. The young man asked Mary not to drive herself to despair by overworking, to eat well and rest on her day off. The protagonist's subordinate smiled softly and promised her boss that she would definitely do so. Thus began a new week, where Assistant Ian arranged a meeting with store managers, and Emily quickly joined the fifth team as a center. The main character put small bottles of hangover drink on the table and invited all his subordinates to drink one at a time and go. The young team leader asked his employees to be prepared in advance because they had a special guest today. Harry, with a sly smile on his face, said that he had enough of the last time. Assistant Ian immediately noted that Harry was on a roll today, so he asked me to get together because work was in the first place. Harry exclaimed that today was a special day because with a clear conscience you could go all out for the company's money. The main character confirmed the words of his subordinate and added that today they can enjoy life as much as they want. Thomas informed Emily and Mary that they would be moving forward, so the girls could go home as soon as they finished work. Mary asked her supervisor if it was really possible for them not to go with them. Emily said that this place was for older women, and they had absolutely nothing to do there. Harry put his hand to his heart and promised the girls to personally take care of smashing everyone apart. Emily asked the men not to burden themselves too much, and Mary wished her colleagues good luck. As soon as the men went down to the first floor, Harry said that he could definitely be relied on today. The subordinate of the main character exclaimed that in the first round he would immediately grind half of it to powder. The young head of the 5th team said that Director Brian was a weak drinker, so they would have to adjust to the pace. Harry chuckled cheerfully and said that Thomas, the boss, didn't need to break the mood right away. Assistant Ian said that if Harry fussed like that, he would be pulverized very quickly. With a smile on his face, Harry asked to immediately show him Principal Brian so that the man could smash him in karaoke. The main character looked over the shoulder of his subordinate and was very surprised when he noticed the manager of the company. Harry began to say something else, and the young team leader asked his subordinate to tone down his ardor. The employee agreed that no one could compare with the managing director, who was a legend of the company, in terms of drinking. Harry cheerfully said that someday he would definitely be able to surpass the CEO of Hodson. The main character was even more confused when Harry said that there was nothing to be done with age, so young blood could not be defeated. Harry fell silent abruptly as soon as he felt a heavy hand on his shoulder. Director Brian said in a serious tone that he was very glad to see such an attitude of his employee. Harry jumped back abruptly when he realized that Hodson, the manager of the company, was standing behind him. The main character bowed and noticed that next to Brian were the executive director, the head of sales, the head of finance, and all the heads of departments. The managing director chuckled cheerfully and asked the employees not to belittle them so much. Principal Brian promised that they would give everyone a head start and show that in such years, you can also have fun. The head of the sales department began to get angry because he recognized his employee from the 5th team in the face of the man. The managing director asked the young men to work harder and told his colleagues that they needed to go. However, Mr. Brian stopped and, turning around, called the main character by name. The young man was very surprised because he did not expect that the managing director knew him. Mr. Brian asked Robert if this was the same employee who took over Nacris, to which he immediately received a positive answer. Managing Director Hodson nodded approvingly and asked the head of sales to support Thomas's work. Brian said that developing motivation in the young talents of Hodson is much more important than selling brands that bring pennies. The managing director said that only thanks to young and energetic talents can the company grow. The main character was very happy because he realized that Mr. Brian was talking specifically about him. The head of the sales department bowed to the managing director and promised that he would fulfill the man's request. Mr. Brian ordered Robert not to allow this young talent to go to another team. The managing director looked into the eyes of the main character and said that he had once been like that himself. Mr. Brian said it reminds him of how he used to run around the shops collecting brands to make his first sale with the boss. As soon as the car with the managing director left, Jan's assistant said that Mr. Brian was now in the prime of life. Approaching the establishment, the main character told his assistant Jan that he would smoke so the man could go inside. Now that Thomas had a huge amount of money in his account, the man no longer felt like a weak-willed slave forced to grovel. The protagonist desperately wished he would never return to the corporate world again. However, the young man wanted to become part of the board of directors no less than that, because he had long imagined himself at the top. The guests of the bar were glad that they had gathered in the establishment today, so they decided to have a drink right away. The main character knew that they would drink until they began to confuse the taste of alcohol and water. Workers have worked so hard in pursuit of one goal that it is now an outlet for those who harass themselves at work trying to make a living. Such was the real work of the sales department and employees engaged in intellectual work. The main character knew perfectly well that someone liked to work in such a company, but someone definitely did not. The young man began to wonder if he liked working for the company or not. While already at home, the main character found a note in which Thomas wrote that he wanted to achieve a real income of 6 million won after taxes. The young man lay down on the bed and thought that with such earnings he could earn 100 million a year. The main character knew that such a salary could only be achieved if he got all the promotions without missing a single post. Thomas knew that achieving a salary of 100 million a year was not an easy task in their fashion industry. If you add 3 million real estate income to Thomas's current salary, then at the moment the main character's income was 7 million won. The young man smiled because he realized that his income was already more than 100 million a year. In just 1 year, the main character was able to exceed his main goal by 10 years. However, it turned out that Thomas's work was worth as much as the monthly income that the man would have received if he had invested all the money from the lottery in the room. The main character said to himself that it was so great to feel proud of himself again. The young man knew that his work was worth something, which meant that Thomas's life was wonderful. The next day, when the main character was going to work, the man noticed a black car near the office. A man sitting in the car ordered his subordinates to continue working in a stern voice. The main character smiled slightly because he was sure that one day he could also become the same. The young man liked to imagine himself as the director of the company because this title fit his name. Suddenly, Thomas felt that he had been slapped on the back, and the man heard a familiar voice. Clinton chuckled and wondered why the head of the 5th team was so cheerful on the way to work. The main character replied that he was just glad to see his boss, and he thought that the deputy head of the sales department was again bothering him. Clinton narrowed his eyes, because he thought the young head of the 5th team was very suspicious lately. Entering the office, the main character took off his jacket and sat down at his computer seat to start working. Everyone was surprised when Jan's assistant came into the office and exclaimed indignantly that he was by the 2nd team. The man clutched his head and said irritably that he was very infuriated by Kim's assistant. Assistant Jan shouted indignantly that the assistant of the 2nd team had no right to interfere in the affairs of their team. The main character got up from his workplace and asked his subordinate what had just happened. Harry asked his colleague to calm down, saying that the guys from the 2nd team had always been good. The young leader of the 5th team was curious to know what happened to his subordinate with his assistant Kim. The main character noticed a message on his monitor screen in which the head of the 2nd team offered the man to smoke on the roof. Thomas immediately assumed that the head of the 2nd team wanted to discuss the problem of Kim's assistant. As soon as the main character climbed to the roof and noticed the man, he immediately asked what happened to Ian and Kim's assistant there. The head of the 2nd team, named Austin, with a slight smile on his face, replied that there was nothing special. The man explained that Kim had expressed himself incorrectly, and Ian, in turn, got angry, and they had a fight. The main character asked Austin what Kim's assistant had said incorrectly. The young man froze as soon as the head of the 2nd team told him that Kim's assistant thought Thomas was overdoing it. The employees of the 2nd team are in full discussion that Thomas has decided to send a contract employee Mary to Paris for NACRIS training. The main character said in a calm tone that it was uncivilized to say such things behind his back. Now the young head of the 5th team understood why Assistant Jan was so angry. Olive chuckled and said that his subordinate had simply expressed himself incorrectly, thereby creating a conflict. The head of the 2nd team asked why they should blush because of some contract employee. The main character frowned because he did not understand how a man could afford this. The leader of the 2nd group asked Thomas how other contract employees would feel if Mary were sent to Paris. Austin said that it would soon get to the point where even temporary employees would start saying that the boss Thomas was strange. The head of the 2nd team asked the main character to be attentive to each other so as not to apologize or make excuses because of temporary employees. The main character understood perfectly well that at work, if possible, he should not make enemies for himself. The young leader of the 5th team rubbed his forehead and, exhaling deeply, replied that the man was right. However, Thomas knew that the leader, in order to maintain the morale of the team, must draw a certain line that must not be crossed. The main character said that he was funny that the manager personally came up to apologize for Kim's assistant because of such a trifle. Thomas put one hand in his pocket and asked if Austin knew what he had done for him at the last meeting. The main character explained that if all the brands went to the 1st team, that the 2nd team's performance would drop sharply. The team leader smiled and said that in the end it was good for them. Thomas exclaimed that Thomas could not dare to make him look like a selfish and strange leader. Olive was confused when the main character turned around sharply and said that he would talk to Kim's assistant in person. The head of the 2nd team asked Thomas as a friend what had come over the young man. Olive grabbed the young head of the 5th team by the hand and exclaimed that they could discuss everything peacefully. The head of the 2nd team indignantly exclaimed that he, as a senior leader, was trying to have a good talk with Thomas. Olive began to point his finger at the shoulder of the main character and say that the man himself made such an unforgivable mistake with a temporary employee. Suddenly, the door swung open and the head of the sales department appeared on the roof with his deputy. Mr. Robert called the head of the first team a disgrace and asked what the man was doing in general. As soon as the management learned about the whole situation, Clinton indignantly exclaimed that it made no sense to send a contract employee to study abroad. Olive smiled and said that it was because the boss Thomas had been insistent from the start. The main character explained to his superiors that this is a great opportunity to gain experience, see and hear everything with his own eyes. The deputy head of the department, displeased, asked what to do in Paris for an employee who is temporary. Mr. Robert stopped Clinton's indignation and said that the head of the 5th department, Thomas, simply decided to prove himself to the fullest in this position. The head of sales was sure that the young man just wanted Emily and the contract employee to develop. Mr. Robert looked at his deputy and asked Clinton to support his idea. The head of sales said that instead of chasing a small profit from the brand, it was more important to cultivate the young talent of Hodson. The main character was a little confused when Mir Robert said that the company should constantly nurture young and ambitious specialists. The young head of the 5th team arched an eyebrow because he realized that Robert had repeated the managing director's speech the previous day word for word. The head of the sales department said that he also once ran back and forth, trying to save his first brand, working with the executive director. Mr. Robert ordered the two men not to quarrel, to share opportunities, and to work together amicably. The main character grinned that the leader of the first team exclaimed that he had filled in the words of the head of the department. The young man then went to Assistant Kim to ask if the employee wanted to say anything to him. An employee of the first team got up from his workplace and asked the main character for forgiveness, saying that he was wrong. The manager Thomas suggested that Assistant Kim continue to do only his own business. Assistant Ian and contract employee Mary looked at Thomas in surprise when the man said that they shouldn't meddle in each other's business. The main character said that he did not understand why Kim's assistant was inflating the conflict if the head of the second team was silent. In a serious tone, Thomas noted that other leaders also have their own opinions, but they are silent. All the employees of the department were very surprised when Kim's assistant promised that he would be careful next time. The protagonist looked at his subordinate and noticed Assistant Yang nodding to express his gratitude. Thomas didn't want to blame anyone or win because the man was just acting as a leader to keep the team's morale up. The deputy head of the department noted that Thomas had recently become aggressive and suggested that the young man had some support. The main character was well aware that in the corporate world you walk on a razor's edge every day, so Thomas decided to take another step into this world. The next day, Thomas arrived at the housing complex, which he had recently been to with another realtor. The protagonist suggested that due to the quick sale, the apartment that the man should see today was not on the lists of the largest search platform in Korea. The first owner the young man met was the man who manages this prestigious area. As the house was still under construction, there was no underground parking yet, so Thomas could watch the expensive cars. The young man took a deep breath and immediately concluded that even the air in this area is different. The main character liked that the attitude towards him in this area would also be different. Thomas remembered how once the owner of another neighborhood told the main character and his realtor that there was no one to entrust the guys to. A woman with pumped lips said that she could not help the young man in any way. The main character did not object, even when the woman asked the man to come next time. Thomas realized that the owner of the complex did not care about him, because the woman had an impassive attitude to everything that was happening. A woman with pumped lips told the interlocutor on the phone that she was already leaving. Every time the main character went to see the apartment, the man felt the perfect and amazing world of Seoul. The young man did not expect that it could be so interesting to look at ordinary houses. Suddenly, a security guard of the housing complex ran up to the main character when Thomas was taking pictures of the apartment and indignantly asked what the man was doing. The man in uniform was sure that the young man did not live in the area, so he asked what the stranger was doing here. The guard began to demand the number of the house or apartment from the main character in order to first check with the service whether the man was allowed to be in this place. The young man immediately noted that the guards in this housing complex are much stricter. A black car stopped next to the main character, and the driver asked a man in uniform to let him pass. Behind him, the young man heard the voice of his realtor named Bella, who asked if Thomas had been waiting for her for a long time. The woman apologized to the main character for being a little late and Thomas had to wait. The young man calmed Bella down, saying that he himself had only recently come to this place. The realtor told the security guard of the housing complex that she was a realtor and that they had come to see the apartment. The man immediately perked up when Bella said that this young man wanted to buy an apartment in the area. The guard, with a big smile on his face, admitted that he was very happy for the young man and congratulated Thomas. As soon as the young people entered the apartment, Bella said that the apartment had a high-quality renovation, so the room was in no way inferior to the new building. Opening one of the doors, the main character noted that the bathroom is very clean and looks like new. Thomas asked how long the apartment had been empty, to which the realtor replied that they had put it up for urgent sale, but the premises had been empty without tenants for more than a year. The main character knew that the monthly rent is more than 3,001 a year, so this apartment should not be left empty without a purpose. Bella said that her children used to spend their holidays in this apartment while studying in the United States, but now the guys have grown up and live in New York. The woman said that her children were selling this apartment to buy a home in the city of America. The main character thought a little, because it was a completely different level for him. Bella said her children didn't keep cats or dogs, so the floors were clean and the walls didn't need to be painted. The young man looked into the realtor's eyes and asked how much this apartment costs. Bella replied with a smile on her face that the apartment cost 1,096,000,000 won, which was a relatively small amount for such a dwelling. The main character immediately concluded that if such an apartment costs so much, then it is definitely an urgent sale. Thomas noted that the windows of the apartment offer a magnificent open view of the complex, so if he misses such a chance, he will definitely regret it in the future. Bella said that if Thomas agreed to such a price and condition of the apartment, it would be simply unbelievable. Previously, the main character was afraid whether he would have enough money for at least some apartment, and now a man can become the owner of an apartment in a prestigious area of Korea for only 2 billion won. The realtor said that if the young man hesitated, then Thomas had better immediately refuse such a lucrative deal. The main character looked into the woman's eyes and confidently said that he had made a decision. Bella smiled broadly and said that it was very good that the young man was so determined. The main character offered the woman to agree on 1,900,000,000 won and added that if Bella agreed, then they could immediately sign the contract. The woman couldn't believe that the man was asking for a price of 660 million won. The director of the real estate agency shook her head, saying that this was impossible, but promised to talk to the owner. Suddenly, the protagonist realized that asking for a discount of 600 million was a huge stupidity. The young man was well aware that even 60 million was difficult to coordinate. The main character was well aware that if he missed such an opportunity, then in the future he would bite his elbows. Thomas suggested that he had lost his sense of reality because he had the opportunity to earn money that he had never seen before. The young man suddenly realized that he had underestimated the price for such a profitable urgent sale. Sitting at work, Thomas thought that if he made a mistake in his work, they would say that the man not only had a bad temper, but also no abilities. The main character asked Harry if his subordinate had received a response about the store plan. A subordinate of the young leader told the man that they had not yet received any answer. The main character exclaimed that how could they not get an answer if they sent a request last week? Thomas said discontentedly that if the partners took on this task, then they had to do everything properly. Emily informed her supervisor that she would contact her partner as soon as they began their working day and demanded a response. The young girl added that she would also require customers to send materials for window dressing. Assistant Jan believed that from the very beginning it was necessary to take the initiative into his own hands and suggested that for every mistake of the client, he should demand something in return. The main character asked his subordinate if the man knew that the store manager's father had died, to which Jan replied that he had already sent a wreath in the morning. Thomas thanked his subordinate for his good work as soon as Jan's assistant told him that he was going to check on the status of the shipments in the warehouse. Closer to the evening, the main character went out on the roof to smoke and concluded that since he had not yet been called, then the deal fell through. The young man opened a page on the internet with prices for apartments in a prestigious area of Seoul, and noted that apartments there cost more than 2 billion won. The main character realized that excessive greed for investment is a strong poison for a person. The young man became upset and realized that he needed to agree to the original price. Due to an unreasonable bet, what the main character had almost in his hands flew away, and the man himself missed his chance. The main character banged his fist on the table with all his strength, because the young man was very offended. The young man tried to calm himself down with the thought that this was simply not his apartment. Thomas knew that a huge amount of money would not be lost if the man did not buy an apartment right now. The main character understood that even if he was lucky enough to become the owner of an apartment in a prestigious area of Seoul, he would still have to travel by subway and bus. The young man stopped in front of a huge staircase that Thomas had yet to climb. The main character knew that he still had a very long way to go to achieve his goal. Suddenly, Thomas received a call, and the man's eyes widened in surprise when Bella said that this usually doesn't happen. From an overabundance of emotions, the young man clenched his fists tightly as soon as the realtor said that the owners of the apartment wanted to make a deal at Thomas's price as soon as possible. The main character was delighted, so he asked Bella to send him an account number so that the man could transfer the payment. To prevent the owners of the apartment from changing their minds, the young man immediately transferred 1,900,000,000 won to their account. The main character quickly climbed the stairs and exclaimed that he was now the owner of an apartment in a prestigious area of Seoul. The money that Thomas won, although it has not turned the man's life upside down recently, has given him the strength not to succumb to other people's influence. Now the apartment of the main character will give the man the strength not to be a toy in the hands of this harsh reality of the city. There are about 400 fashion companies in Korea, and design teams exist only in domestic companies. The rest of the companies do not have their own design teams, and most of them either work under foreign licenses or are subsidiaries of foreign firms. Hodson is a major licensing authority and is a leader in department stores and duty-free. Because of the nature of Hodson's business, the organization's sales department has tremendous influence. The main character, being at his workplace, asked the interlocutor on the phone this time to do everything on time. The young leader of the 5th team exclaimed that the interlocutor should send all the documents by the end of the morning, so as not to regret later when trouble happens. Thomas dropped the call and said with displeasure that if a person does not have love for his brand, then there is no need to create it at all. Emily asked Ian if the man had solved the problem with the wrong shots that came from Naxx last time. The assistant to the head of the 5th team said with a smile that the girl quickly grabbed it. Harry came up to the guys and, raising one hand, asked his colleagues to look at his hands. The man added that he wanted the guys to see how badly his fingerprints were erased. Emily furrowed her brows slightly and excitedly asked what had happened to the man. Harry exhaled wearily and told her that she, her supervisor and deputy had spent 2 days in the warehouse unpacking boxes. An employee of the 5th team said that they were instructed to take a picture of each item and upload it to the report. Mary apologized to her colleague, saying that she and Emily were late at the off-site meeting, so they could not help the men. Harry smiled contentedly and told the young girl that it was okay because it was his job. The employee of the 5th team began to replay, saying that it was simply unbearable, as if time stopped at that moment. Harry said contentedly that thanks to Boss Thomas, they were able to eat good Korean beef after work. The main character grinned cheerfully and admitted that it was really very hard. Harry said that they could now be called purchasing planners and product managers in distribution and retail companies. Assistant Yang calmly replied to his colleague that they had always been engaged in this type of activity. The main character was glad that his team, which started as a bunch of clumsy people, supports each other and copes with all the tasks. At one of the breaks, Thomas asked his assistant if it was really true that the head of the 4th team, named Hamed, was quitting. Ian told the protagonist that the 4th team is in disarray, but the manager Hamed still goes to work. Thomas knew that Hamed, along with a leader from the 1st team named David, were considered low-skilled managers. The irony was that these men were the first among their colleagues to receive leadership positions, but because of the 2 wounded promotion, the men had to please others. Team leaders had to pretend to be good guys in front of subordinates who sought to take their place, and as a result, the men were squeezed like in a sandwich. This did not mean that men were incompetent, but after their appointment to the position of leader, the abilities of team leaders decreased significantly. The main character suggested that this could be the fate of those who get promoted before their colleagues. Thomas realized that he himself had recently experienced such difficulties that he wanted to quit. Assistant Yang noticed that his supervisor had been looking at him for a while and asked if the young man wanted to say anything to him. The main character turned his head negatively and told his subordinate with a smile that he was just thinking a little. Assistant Ian asked Thomas how long the position of the head of the 4th team would be vacant. The main character replied that most likely, before the next planned promotion, someone would be appointed acting for these duties. Anyone knowing about all the difficulties will still wait for an opportunity for promotion, because the desire to be the first is the instinct of every office worker. As soon as the men returned to their workplace, Mary told Thomas that the head of the department was urgently calling a meeting of managers. The main character knew that this meeting was related to the appointment of a new head of the 4th team. Thomas had the feeling that the bosses were just waiting for this to immediately organize a meeting and fill the empty vacancy. The young head of the fifth team was not surprised, because this was the harsh reality of the company. The main character noticed the head of the fourth team, who was standing surrounded by employees and laughing merrily. The man, noticing the main character, asked Thomas if the man was going to a meeting of managers. The main character answered positively and noted for himself that the man looks relaxed and carefree. Thomas suggested that the reason may be that Hamed plans to start his own business after leaving the company. Now the main character no longer thought about dismissal, but the man wondered if he would be as calm as Mr. Hamed. A message was received on the phone of a young man about the receipt of the first rent for the apartment. At the moment, the main character had the feeling that he was receiving two salaries. Thomas jumped abruptly to the side because he felt the deputy head of the department behind him, who was about to hit his subordinate on the back. The main character asked Mr. Clinton in confusion what had happened. The deputy manager asked if Thomas was happy that assistant Ian would be promoted to take the place of the head of the fourth team. The main character was surprised because he did not expect that his deputy would take such a position. Thomas was initially sure that someone from the fourth team would get promoted. The deputy head of the sales department explained that given the work experience, assistant Jan had long deserved a promotion. The main character was unhappy because they had only recently become a real team. Mr. Clinton approached the head of the fifth team and, with a sly smile on his face, said that the man still had a lot to learn. The deputy head of sales added that Thomas was limp because of such a trifle and that nothing had been decided yet. Clint turned around as he was leaving, saying that management would likely appoint someone from the fourth team to lead the game. The main character realized that it was a small check by the deputy head of the sales department. Clinton, with a sly smile on his face, said that even their ambitious boss, Thomas, felt insecure without Ian's assistant. As soon as the meeting ended, the main character breathed a sigh of relief because Hamed's deputy was appointed to the place of the head of the fourth team. Thomas returned to his desk, and Jan's assistant asked the man how the meeting went. The main character, in a slightly tired voice, replied to his subordinate that the meeting had just ended. Assistant Jan was sure that a decision had already been made who exactly would become the leader of the fourth team. The young leader of the fifth team looked into the eyes of his subordinate and replied that the decision had been made. In the evening, the main character went with his assistant Jan for a drink in a nearby bar. Thomas's subordinate was upset and admitted that he had little hope that he might be promoted. Assistant Yang chuckled and said that Deputy Edward was more suitable for the role of leader. The main character looked carefully at his subordinate when the man said that Edward was the most capable among the rest of his colleagues. The head of the fifth team said that he did not agree with Ian's words and added that just now Edward is more suitable for this position. The main character looked his assistant in the eyes and confidently said that Deputy Edward was not even close to Ian. Thomas's subordinate smiled broadly because he hadn't expected to hear such words from his superior. Assistant Jan laughed softly and admitted that the young man didn't look like himself today. When the men decided to go home, Thomas's subordinate admitted that he was even happy to some extent. Assistant Jan looked at the main character and said that he had been enjoying his team lately. The main character was a little confused and told the man that their bonus was likely to be small. Assistant Jan said with a smile that he felt good, despite the fact that it should be the other way around. Unpleasant moments no longer seemed like this to Thomas's subordinate, and the man was already looking forward to new work tasks. The main character was very surprised when, after a couple of minutes of silence, the assistant Jan thanked him. The young man smiled and replied that work is a solitary game, just like life. The main character looked at his colleague and offered to show everyone what they are capable of as a team. The next day, in the sales department, the fifth team heard indignant shouts. The boss, David, shouted for the man to finally start watching his tongue. Mr. Austin indignantly said that the man himself was going too far. The men grappled with each other, and each tried to defend his point of view, not wanting to compromise. Executive David and Executive Austin, who have been engaged in a covert power struggle all along, let all their stress out this morning. Assistant Jan said that after the fire, the most interesting sight was the quarrel between the neighbors. Thomas's subordinate added with a smile that he was interested in watching the battle between the leader of the first team and the leader of the second. The main character said that since one of these men was about to be promoted to deputy director, then the men's rivalry was escalating. Assistant Yang was glad that the executives had so much energy, as all this time the men were engaged in an invisible struggle for promotions, bonuses, and the rest. The main character, holding a cup of coffee in his hand, told his subordinate that this time a struggle for brands had unfolded between the men. Thomas added that when the fourth team outsourced, Good brands were left unattended. Assistant Jan asked if these were the brands that the former deputy of the fourth team could not handle. Thomas's subordinate looked at his supervisor and said that in a way they were to be envied. Assistant Jan added that these brands are profitable in themselves. You just need to deal with them, but they do not have enough people to participate in this. The main character with a smile asked if it was really bad, to which the subordinate replied that if the brands were transferred to the fifth team, then their profits would skyrocket. Executive Austin indignantly said that David was constantly idling around and getting everything on a silver platter. Assistant Ian informed the main character that the boss Austin has been kind of nervous lately and behaving too aggressively. The boss David furrowed his brows and exclaimed that this was a real rudeness towards him. The head of the sales department came into the office and shouted loudly what the noise was in the morning. Mr. Robert exclaimed indignantly that the team leaders had already completely disbanded. The head of the sales department was sure that the conflict between the leaders of the first and second teams was related to the recent redistribution of brands of the fourth team. Mr. Robert began to shout that the results do not fall from the sky and you need to fight for them in the market on your own. The head of the sales department pointed his finger at the door and told the men to go outside and look for their opportunities there. Assistant Jan turned to the main character with the words that he thought that life finally appeared in the sales department. But everything ended quickly. Mary was glad that the head of the sales department showed up on time, so a real fight could begin. The main character sat down at his workplace and thought about why people endure humiliation at work for the sake of some kind of salary. In any team, everything was the same, and a person is just a cog in this huge machine or, in other words, a slave. Alternatively, you can quit your job and open your own business to earn much more there. However, due to uncertainty or fear of the unknown, Thomas still keeps his resignation letter in his pocket and makes excuses. There are people who missed their opportune moment to change jobs in the company. There are people who have lost all their real friends because of hard work. For such people, the company becomes home, friends, family, especially when a person reaches the level of a leader. 2 weeks later, the main character received a message informing him that Austin's mother had passed away. It was for this reason that all the employees of the sales department went to the mourning hall. Leader David approached Mr. Austin as he stood outside and wished his mother to rest in peace. The main character was a little surprised when he noticed two leaders who were calmly talking to each other. Though men had been the enemy of yesterday and might be tomorrow's, Thomas knew that they would still be colleagues who worked together for the good of the Hodson Company. Assistant Ian apologized to the protagonist for making the man wait after getting into Thomas's car. A subordinate of the head of the fifth team said that Mr. Edward is now suffering a little because he unexpectedly became the head of the fourth team. The main character asked his assistant if the man knew what was wrong with his former boss, Hamed. A subordinate of the head of the fifth team said that this man did not take care of the transfer of affairs, but did nothing but chill out. Jan's assistant added that Mr. Hamed irresponsibly resigned, leaving Edward's deputy to deal with all this alone. The main character noted that the head Hamed did not come to the funeral, although the man was quite close to Austin. Thomas's subordinate indignantly said that from the moment Mr. Hamed quit, the man squeezed everything he could out of Hodson's company. The main character replied to his assistant Ian that this was too much, because they used to be colleagues with Hamed. Assistant John said with displeasure that if Hamed had at least a drop of conscience, the man would not invent non-existent business trips and would not fly to Italy at the expense of the company. The main character wondered if the leader Hamed was calculating his steps that day, so he had such a calm face. Suddenly, the young head of the fifth team realized that a former employee of the company, Hodson, had joined their line of Mantoffs. The main character was referring to a city in northern Italy that was known for its wholesalers and luxury goods. The most important thing was that these merchants can work with any client if it is profitable. The main character has seen more than once how people use their work connections to develop their own business. The young man, scratching his head, admitted that the methods of leader Hamed were a little dirty. When a person works enough in the company and establishes personal ties with suppliers, he inevitably has a desire to start his own business. Many people quit this field and try their hand, and some of these people really manage to earn good money. However, there are a huge number of people who did not succeed and were left with nothing. The main character was wondering if the head of the sales department would leave it just like that if Hamed contacted their suppliers. A worker named Jack turned to the manager Thomas with the words that if you do as the man wants, then you will have to redo the entire ceiling. The fifth team was up to their necks in business, preparing for the opening of the knapsack store and arguing with contractors about the interior. The main character informed Jack that the man in the initial stages should have been told that this was impossible. The employee said that if they redo the ceiling, the deadlines will shift and the price will soar. Harry winked at Jack and said with a smile that he was relying on the man, adding that he and Thomas would go to other stores. The subordinate of the main character informed the man that everything would be ready by tomorrow, as Thomas requested. The main character praised Harry and invited his subordinate to have dinner with beef. Harry immediately perked up, and Thomas informed them that they were going to a great restaurant that was nearby. Looking to the side, the protagonist's subordinate sharply changed his face and confused admitted that he had plans for today, which he had forgotten about. Harry asked his boss to treat him next time and said goodbye to the man. The next day, the main character explained to Emily how to properly draw up documents. Suddenly, Thomas was approached by a new leader of the fourth team named Edward. The man asked the protagonist to drink coffee with him if Thomas had free time. As soon as the executives left, Emily wondered why Edward wanted to talk to Thomas. In the break room, the new head of the fourth team told the main character that Hamed, who had resigned, was doing well, but the man did not have enough hands in the new company. Edward said that Hamed has already signed contracts with Prada, Versace, Moschino, and the man also decided to focus on China. The new head of the fourth team added that he is not at all jealous of Hamed's success. The main character wondered why Edward was telling him all this, because the topic of conversation was not the most pleasant. The man explained to Thomas that the problem was that Hamed wanted to poach people from their team to make up for the lack of employees. The protagonist froze abruptly when Edward asked if the man knew that Hamed had recently contacted Harry. The leader of the fourth team explained that this was the reason he decided to talk to Thomas, because a man should know that. The main character returned to his workplace and began to reflect on the words spoken by Edward. Now the young man understood why Harry had given up his favorite beef the night before. The main character suggested that yesterday's urgent business of a subordinate was just related to the resigned boss Hamed. Thomas was well aware that in a free country, he would not be able to control the choice of his subordinate. Emily approached the head of the fifth team and asked the main character if the man would be on the road today. Thomas told the girl with a smile on his face that he and Harry were planning to go to check out the anicaps store in the department store that afternoon. Emily told the man that assistant Ian and Mary had also left for a barcoding assignment for NACS. The center of the fifth team realized that today she remains completely alone in the team office. Harry got up from his desk and said with a smile that with Emily, nothing threatened the fifth team. The protagonist's subordinate informed Thomas that he had already coped with his tasks and they could go to check. As he put on his jacket, the young man thought that he had absolutely no reason to keep Harry from firing. The main character was sure that his subordinate would not want to go to the company of Hamed because the man's organization looks unreliable. Thomas was well aware that Harry could earn in 3 years the amount that he would have received in 10 years at Hodson's company. However, the main character knew that you never know how fate will turn out, so Harry may make a mistake. Thomas's subordinate was glad that he had managed to stop the elevator because otherwise he would have had to wait for ages. With a big smile on his face, Harry invited the young leader of the fifth team to get into the elevator first. As soon as the men went outside, Harry asked the man to wait for him a while he went to the store. The subordinate of the main character bought himself a lottery ticket and was very happy when he won. Harry thought it was unbelievable that he had been able to win as much as 50,000 won in the lotto. The protagonist's subordinate happily exclaimed that luck was definitely on his side because only good events haunted him. Thomas understood that luck and opportunity are perceived differently depending on how you look at them. The protagonist's subordinate offered to get behind the wheel, but Thomas refused, saying that he did not trust anyone with his car. As soon as the men met Jack, Harry grabbed the man tightly by the shoulders and said with a big smile that he knew the worker would do everything perfectly. The main character thanked Jack for his work because the store looked better than in the sketch. The worker told the young leader of the fifth team that they worked until 2 o'clock in the morning to do everything. The main character promised Jack that he would add some of his money to the men for the bath. Thomas informed Harry to ask the department store management to vacuum the room. The young leader of the fifth team smiled slightly because the launch of NACS was just around the corner. Jack said that the electrical installation would begin tomorrow and asked the men to arrange the cash register as in the sketch. The main character looked at the men and thought that he began to understand people better as soon as he became a leader. Thomas knew that his subordinate Harry had a good heart, so the man could not refuse and took on all the work. The main character knew that Harry tries to seem even more cheerful when it gets tough for a man. Thomas believed that it was highly likely that Harry would become entangled in his own identity, trying to conform to other people's demands. The protagonist suggested that this is why his subordinate wants to start a new life, leaving the past behind. On his way home, Harry happily said that the launch of NAX would finally take place next week. The subordinate of the main character asked if the young leader was sure that they would succeed. Thomas immediately noticed that Harry looked tense, despite the fact that he had been smiling just a few minutes ago. In a serious tone, the subordinate of the main character admitted that he had to apologize to the manager. The young man immediately assumed what exactly the subordinate wanted to tell him. The main character stopped the car near the cafe, and Harry told Thomas that he was going to quit in the near future. Thanks to the leader of the fourth team, Edward, the young man was already prepared. The protagonist knew that the loss of Harry would be a major blow to their team because they had yet to promote Nacris in the Korean market. Thomas stood up and asked his subordinate why the man lowered his head so guiltily. The protagonist thanked Harry for the man staying with them until the opening of Nacris. For a young man, the fact that a subordinate, being an ordinary employee, postponed his departure is a manifestation of care for his team. Harry scratched his head and, confused, admitted that he was sorry that he was doing this to his boss. Thomas's subordinate apologized to the manager for behaving like a sycophant when he first joined Team 5. The main character furrowed his brows and asked Harry if this was the real reason for the man's departure. Thomas's subordinate lowered his head even lower and admitted that it had nothing to do with his dismissal. In a calm tone, the main character said that he would not ask about the reasons and promised that he would definitely try to keep the man. Thomas added that Harry doesn't need to feel obligated to stay if the boss asks for it. The main character closed his eyes and said that he just wanted to show his subordinate how important he was to the fifth team. The young head of the fifth team added that he wanted to pay tribute to Harry's dedication and perseverance over the past 2 years at Hodgson's company. Thomas's subordinate looked at his supervisor in surprise when the protagonist admitted that he would be upset if his boss so simply agreed to the dismissal. A week later, the first store with Nacris was launched, accompanied by a festive event organized by a shopping center. Walking down the hallway, Harry turned to his supervisor and said that the man had done a lot to launch Nacris. The men froze in surprise when they heard shouts in the office that the former leader Hamed had no conscience at all. The head of the sales department indignantly demanded that a council of all managers be immediately convened because they could not leave everything just like that. At the council, Robert said that he knew that Hamed had opened his own business and connected to the resources of their company. The main character was interested in why the leader of the fourth team was not present at the meeting. The head of the sales department indignantly exclaimed that the resigned manager should have observed at least the minimum rules of decency. Robert then turned to his deputies and asked Clinton to tell them everything. The deputy head of the department took his notebook in his hands and read out the names of the employees from the fourth team. Clinton said with a serious tone in his voice that these people, who had already written a letter of resignation, went to Hamed. From the reaction of other leaders, the main character realized that these people knew absolutely nothing. Chief Austin exclaimed that it was not permissible to use resources and lure people away. David, who is the leader of the first team, added that there is no way they can ignore this. The main character noticed that the two executives who were fiercely fighting for the position of deputy director united in their anger. The young head of the fifth team only now realized that everything was much more serious than the man initially thought. The main character wondered if he would have been able to react so calmly to the meanness of the leader Hamed if he had not once won the lottery. Thomas suggested that an apartment in a prestigious area of Seoul in his name made him too indifferent. The young man would have wondered what would have happened to him if he had given the letter of resignation that was in his pocket to Clinton. The main character did not take into account the fact that the situation with the resigned manager can affect the motivation of other employees. Robert told his employees that their partners would not even pay attention if they wrote a complaint against Hamed. The deputy head of the department crossed his arms in front of him and said in a serious tone that they had only one way out. The main character suggested that Clinton again has a brilliant idea that will help solve everything. The deputy head of the department said in an icy tone that they would rein in the former employee in one fell swoop.